She thought it would go viral. A loud American tourist stood just inches from the royal guard, live streaming to thousands as she pointed, shouted, and laughed at the man trained not to move. Her voice pierced the quiet of Buckingham Palace's courtyard, turning heads and raising phones. "Come on, do something," she taunted, leaning in with smug amusement. He didn't react, didn't flinch, not even a blink. But then, without a word, he moved. One deliberate pivot, not away, toward her. The shift was subtle, but seismic. Her smirk faltered. The crowd froze, and for the first time all day she fell silent. She thought he was just a statue in red. She forgot what happens when history itself decides to walk toward you. Before we show what happened next, tell us where you're watching from, and stay until the moment silence hit her louder than her own voice. Corporal Edward Wolfe, age 38, doesn't speak much, but his silence says more than most men's speeches. A former British paratrooper with a rigid spine and eyes that have seen more than they'll ever tell, Edward begins his day like every other, before dawn, in a flat that feels more like a shrine than a home. There's nothing flashy, just a few essentials, a precisely folded red uniform, and two sacred things on the wall: a framed letter from the Crown and a photograph of his younger sister, lost in the line of duty. He shines his boots like a ritual, not for inspection, but for remembrance. Every button he fastens carries weight. Every crease in the fabric is a memory. Edward doesn't guard for applause or attention. He doesn't even guard for country, not exactly. He guards because someone has to stand for dignity in a world obsessed with noise. And on this particular day, it won't be war that tests him. It will be a camera, a voice, a scream, and a choice. Casey Miller was 27, loud, and lived for live streams. With a phone gripped in one hand and ego in the other, she strutted into the courtyard of Buckingham Palace like it was her personal stage. Her voice bounced off the stone like a fire alarm, shrill, relentless. "Watch this," she laughed to her followers, angling the camera at the tall royal guard. "She won't last 5 seconds next to that guy." Her friends laughed, egging her on. She waved her arms dramatically, danced mockingly just inches from the guard's face, screaming lines she thought would trend. Around her, other tourists shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their phones, unsure if this was still funny. But the guard remained still, unshakable, unmoved. His eyes didn't flicker. His breath didn't waver. That only irritated Casey more. And then she said it, loud, cruel. "You're just a costume prop, aren't you?" The words hung in the air like poison, and in that moment, the entire atmosphere shifted. The smirk remained on her lips, but something colder was beginning to rise in the silence that followed. Without a word, the guard turned. It wasn't abrupt. It wasn't hostile. It was something far more powerful, steeped in centuries of tradition and forged by years of brutal discipline. One smooth, precise pivot. His boots struck the cobblestones with an unhurried, deliberate rhythm as he faced her. Expression unreadable, jaw set with restraint. His eyes locked forward with quiet command. The shift was minimal, but its impact cracked the entire courtyard open like a dam. Laughter died on contact. Casey, mid-giggle and halfway through a sentence meant for her followers, froze. Her phone wobbled in her hand, still live streaming, as the signature smirk vanished from her face. For a breathless second, the girl who built a career on being louder than everyone else was silent. The transformation was instant. Tourists who had been laughing turned still. One child stopped mid-step, clutching their father's hand tighter. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" as if anything louder might shatter the moment. Even the nearby guards seemed more still, if that were even possible. Casey's friends, who'd egged her on just seconds earlier, no longer knew whether to laugh, film, or apologize. Their bravado dissolved in the tension. Corporal Edward Wolfe took 3 slow, grounded steps toward her. He wasn't charging. He wasn't threatening. He was teaching, with silence. The rifle stayed against his chest, perfectly aligned. His chin dipped slightly as his gaze fixed on her, not with malice, not even anger, but with the kind of dignified weight that made the air itself feel heavier. A man who'd served in war zones. A man who'd lost his sister in the line of duty. A man whose every movement was born from discipline, not ego. Casey opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Her fingers twitched nervously around her phone. The live chat exploded in real time. Wait, what is going on? She's done. The guard moved. Holy shot. Respect just walked forward. But Casey wasn't looking at her screen anymore. She wasn't performing. For once, she was present. Really present. And everything she'd thought about that guard, that he was a prop, a costume, a set piece for her content, unraveled in front of her. Because now she saw it. He wasn't standing there for show. He was standing there for something, and for someone. She hadn't even begun to understand. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He just stood before her, calm and unshaken. And in that stillness, she began to crumble, not from fear, but from realization. A few moments later, without a sound, he turned and returned to his post. The same measured pace. The same silent power. The rifle returned across his chest. His eyes forward once more, as if nothing had happened. But something had. Something everyone in that courtyard would never forget. The silence didn't return out of awkwardness. It returned out of reverence. Because in less than 30 seconds, one man reminded the world that real strength doesn't have to shout. And Casey? She never finished the video. She never uploaded another angle. She didn't even look at the camera again. Because for once, in front of thousands of strangers and a single man in a red uniform, there was simply nothing left to say. By nightfall, the moment had ignited the internet. The clip spread like wildfire, millions of views in just hours. News outlets played it on repeat. A woman screaming, waving her arms, and then suddenly silenced by a single turn. No words, no force, just the image of a soldier trained to protect a crown, using nothing but presence. The headlines were brutal. Influencer humbled by royal guard. She came for clicks. She got a lesson in discipline. Military veterans across the globe chimed in. That's what restraint looks like. One Marine tweeted, "We don't train to react. We train to outlast." Psychologists wrote about it. Historians explained the tradition behind the guard's silence, how it isn't passive, but a posture of living history. Thousands of comments poured in. She thought he was a statue. Turns out he was a monument. This generation needed to see that not everything needs to be loud to be powerful. Meanwhile, Casey Miller, the tourist at the center of it all, posted a shaky apology. "I didn't mean disrespect," she sniffled into the camera. "I was just having fun." But the internet wasn't listening. Her sponsors released statements. One brand said, "We stand by dignity and tradition, not mockery." Her collabs vanished. Her comments section turned off. She disappeared for days. And in her absence, the guard became the story. Artists sketched him. Musicians sampled the audio silence. Someone slowed down the moment and played it with cinematic music, titling it "The Turn Heard Round the World." But through all the noise, Corporal Edward Wolfe said nothing. He returned to his post the next day, same uniform, same boots, same discipline, because he hadn't moved to go viral. He hadn't turned for applause. He did it for something deeper, for every man and woman who has ever been mocked for standing tall. And while Casey tried to rebuild her image, the world quietly took a lesson. Not every insult deserves a scream. Not every attack needs retaliation. Sometimes, the strongest response is to say absolutely nothing, and still be heard. Edward returned to the barracks expecting a formal debrief or perhaps a quiet reprimand. For guards, even the smallest deviation from protocol was often met with a stern reminder of the code. He had moved, deliberately, publicly. And yet, as he stepped through the quiet stone corridor and entered the commanding office, there was no anger, just a small velvet envelope resting on the desk. No speech, no explanation. Just that envelope, sealed with the royal crest. With steady hands, Edward opened it. The note was handwritten in blue-black ink, signed with a name that carried weight far beyond the walls of that room. You moved only when it mattered. Thank you for reminding the world what restraint looks like. Charles R. Edward stood still for a long moment, the note resting in his gloved hands. His breath was even, controlled, but something shifted in his chest. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. It wasn't validation he sought, but to be understood, even once, by someone who knew what tradition really cost. Slowly, he returned to his quarters. The room was spare, clean, disciplined. At the center of his nightstand, beside his neatly folded gloves and a small bronze plaque of regimental honor, stood a black and white photo of his sister. She wore the same uniform once, proud, fierce, and lost too soon in a place no tourist could pronounce. Edward placed the letter beside her frame. A silent offering, a quiet bond, no fanfare, no parade, no headlines. Just a silent nod from the highest authority in the land, and the presence of someone long gone but never forgotten. To the world, he was the guard who turned without speaking. To the palace, he was a man who upheld centuries of quiet power. But to himself, he was just Edward Wolfe, still standing, still guarding, still caring more than anyone would ever know. Outside, the tourists continued to flock to the gates. Some came to see the place where it happened. Others just came to see a soldier. None of them would know what had been written on that letter. They wouldn't see the name on the photo beside it. But they would feel something. A weight. A calm. A sense that sometimes one step forward doesn't break tradition. It protects it. And Edward? He would return to his post, same uniform, same posture. But inside, something had shifted. Not pride, not arrogance, just a quieter kind of strength. The kind that never asks to be seen, but always leaves something behind when it is. Weeks passed, but something in the air around Buckingham Palace had changed. The courtyard no longer buzzed with unchecked noise. The laughter, once shrill and careless, softened. Tourists still gathered, of course, but now many did so with a hush, as if stepping onto sacred ground. Phones still rose, but slowly, carefully, not as weapons for spectacle, but as quiet attempts to capture a moment they suddenly felt unworthy of disturbing. Children who once mimicked and mocked now stood straighter. They whispered to their parents. Some saluted, small hands trembling with sincerity. And remarkably, the parents didn't stop them. They encouraged it. "Say thank you," one mother whispered to her son, pointing towards the guard with eyes that now held something more than curiosity. Something closer to reverence. A new sign appeared near the palace gate. Nothing flashy. Just a slim bronze plaque mounted to the railing, beneath the ornate iron. It didn't list rules. It didn't give instructions. It simply read, "Please respect the silence. It's older than you." No name, no context. But somehow, everyone seemed to understand exactly what it meant. Casey Miller's name faded faster than anyone expected. Her TikTok was gone, deleted without fanfare, without apology. Her last post had been a still image of a quiet courtyard with a caption that simply read, "Not everything is content." There were no comments, no hashtags, just silence. Whether it was remorse or shame, no one knew. And perhaps that was the point. Edward remained where he had always been, same boots, same rifle, same unwavering stare. He stood tall, unaffected by the shifting tides around him. But the public saw him differently now, not just as a tourist attraction or tradition frozen in time, but as a man, alive, disciplined, carrying something deeper than the uniform on his back. From time to time, people still tried to provoke him. They always had. But now, others stepped in before he had to. A woman once grabbed a stranger's arm mid-scream, whispering, "Don't." He deserves better. The crowd agreed, not with words, but with the stillness that followed. There were no speeches, no medals, just a man, standing silently at his post while the world around him relearned what it meant to watch rather than demand, to respect rather than consume. Edward didn't flinch, didn't blink, and that's exactly why people began to understand. He had not changed, but they had. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shove back. He didn't even blink when most would have snapped. All he did was turn. One calm, deliberate pivot that shattered everything louder than a shout ever could. And in that single motion, the world remembered something it had nearly forgotten, that silence isn't surrender, that stillness can be the sharpest blade, that true strength doesn't need to flex. It simply waits until the line is crossed. For days, people kept returning to the video, not for the drama, but for that exact moment, the guard's turn. A motion so subtle, yet so thunderous, it left audiences breathless. They studied it like scripture, replayed it frame by frame. Because in a world that rewards chaos, here was a man who waited until dignity was threatened before making a single move. And even then, he didn't lunge or strike. He walked forward, measured, centered, controlled. Edward never explained himself. He didn't give an interview. He didn't post a statement. And that silence said more than any caption ever could. It echoed with the wisdom of centuries, with the posture of every soldier who ever stood between order and disrespect, not with violence, but with presence. And presence, it turns out, can stop people dead in their tracks. In the weeks that followed, something shifted. Not just outside Buckingham Palace, but beyond. Schools played the clip during assemblies. Military instructors used it in lessons about restraint. Parents showed it to their children not as a warning, but as a lesson. This is what quiet strength looks like. This is what you protect when the noise gets too loud. He hadn't broken protocol. He'd upheld it in the most human way imaginable, by knowing the difference between standing still and standing for something, and by stepping forward only when there was no other choice left. Some said it was just a tourist getting what she deserved. Others said it was the guard sending a message. But to those who truly understood, it was something deeper. It was a man haunted by history, grounded by duty, reminding the world that silence isn't weakness, it's readiness. And when that silence finally breaks, it means you've gone too far. He still stands at his post, same rifle, same boots, same stone-set jaw. But now, People don't just watch him. They listen to him, not because he speaks, but because of what he said without a single word. Have you ever seen someone break the silence just once, and in doing so, speak volumes? Was Edward right to take that step forward? Or does strength lie in never moving at all? Tell us below, and share this story with someone who still believes in the quiet power of dignity.